Greetings and welcome back. In this third mini lecture on Machiavelli, I want to start out by moving away from the Prince for a little bit and trying to tie some of our earlier political thinking in the ancient section to Machiavelli, because your book makes a very brief reference, but really focuses in only on the Prince. And while it does make a mention of Machiavelli's second book, The Discourses, your chapter really ignores it. So I want to discuss it a little bit before I get back to the Prince, just because I think it's interesting, because the Discourses read like a completely different Machiavelli. Everyone thinks of Machiavelli, they think of the Prince, they think of ruthless power, even evil in some cases. But in the Discourses, Machiavelli asks an intriguing question, because in the Prince, the assumption is the government is probably going to be authoritarian. He's talking about a prince, about a great man, if you will, who may unify Italy. Maybe it's Lorenzo de' Medici, who he's writing that book for. But his second book is, well, what if you don't have a prince? What if you don't have an authoritarian political system? What if you have a republic, which is kind of the alternative to an authoritarian system? Instead of rule by the one, the prince, what if you have rule by the many? And so here you really see the influence of Aristotle. Remember, I talked about Aristotle earlier and talked about a polity being his ideal political system, a mixed system where no single class rules, where there is a thriving middle class. Our founding fathers stole his idea of the rule by the one, which would be the president, rule by the few, the Supreme Court, rule by the many in the Congress. And he points out a few things that I find intriguing, and certainly I think potential lessons even today. So the first was, the greatest enemies of free government are complacent and self-interested citizens. And of course, in the Prince, self-interest is an assumption that humans are selfish animals, right? Rejecting that notion of people being community oriented. So in this book, he says to keep corruption, which occurs with power, right? Lord Acton's famous power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. To keep corruption at bay, citizens must demonstrate virtue, and in this case, virtue is being attentive to public affairs. If they are virtuous, if they are a watchdog on the actions of government, right? They need to have certain rights, which certainly you see in our political system, right? To be virtuous, citizens have to have freedom to assemble. I would add, I wrote to expose corruption. You can expose corruptions through freedom of the press. You can expose corruption through freedom of speech. And most importantly, to criticize their leaders. And many have made the claim that the central meaning of America's First Amendment, which we'll talk about later on, is that people have the right to criticize the conduct of public officials. And so certainly this notion in the discourses is something you see with our founding fathers and you see in our Bill of Rights. The second observation that I find interesting from the discourses is that the greatest danger to any republic is corruption from within. And I put the Soviet Union in parentheses because a lot of people have claimed that the Soviet system and even the post-Soviet system, there was a kleptocracy, if you will, that the system was corrupt and that people didn't believe in its ideals. And for example, the greatest reason why people became Communist Party members was not a belief in ideology, but that joining the party had privileges. And so people were looking for material gain, material success, etc. Now, the third one I want to concentrate on for a minute and have you think about, that a free government is a government of laws, not of men. This sounds very much like a very modern concept. And this was stolen by Machiavelli from Cicero. So I want you to write this one down because I will put an exam question in the test bank asking about what should guide uh, men, right? And Cicero was responding to, it's not philosophy or philosophers. It's certainly not great statesmen. Cicero, there's a little box on him at the end of chapter 2. Cicero was a great believer in the law. And the reason that Cicero pointed out the law and why a government should be of laws and not of men is because the law is impersonal and I would claim a silent magistrate, right? So in this particular case, the law is fairer. Now, it's not completely fair, but law is certainly much more impersonal than the whims or desires of an individual. He goes on to say that in a republic, if you need to attack an enemy, to use religious and cultural symbols to legitimize attack, certainly, right? This is consistent with the prince, right? Appearing to be religious, even if you really aren't, because it is a great rallying cry to the masses. I would just caution, however, that using religious and cultural symbols, especially religious symbols, is exceptionally dangerous. And the reason that is dangerous is that if you have a religious war, for example, the war is about values. So let me give you an example. The deadliest conflict in the history of the world until the 20th century when we had World War I and World War II. But the deadliest conflict before then in Europe was the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was the last of the major religious wars on the continent of Europe. It was fought between Catholic and Protestant princes. And in this particular case, the Catholic and Protestant princes were using religious and cultural symbols to legitimize their position in this war. The problem is that it is extremely difficult to terminate conflict based on values. If, for example, one of us is Catholic and one of us is Protestant and we're engaged in a war, how do you negotiate those values? The religion is part of who we are. It's negotiating with the devil. You see, it's far safer and far easier to terminate a war if the war is based on interests. If you're talking about where a boundary line is on a map, or if you're fighting over money, those are relatively easy to negotiate. You know, I may want a territory, you may want a territory. We may be fighting over this small territory, but that territory really has nothing to do with who you and I are as people. And as a result, maybe one of us points out to the other one, you know, there's a big river that flows right through the middle of this territory. And why don't you take the territory to the west of that river, and I'll take the territory to the east of that river. and we can end this devastating war that is killing our people and devastating our economies. That is a far easier conflict to reconcile than over whether you or I are practicing the true faith as a Catholic or a Protestant. So I would just caution you that while Machiavelli talks about using religious and cultural symbols to legitimize attacks, certainly it is a good way to rally your people, but there is a consequence for that, and the consequence is that you're probably committing yourself to a longer and deadlier conflict than you need. So there's 10 minutes or so on the discourses. Just want to say a few things about the chapters, the chapter's discussion on essentially Machiavelli's assumption that the ends justify the means. And he uses this allegory of, right, the lion and the fox in this particular case. So the prince should be as strong as a lion and cunning as a fox. All right. Certainly, I think being intelligent, having a reputation, being strong, I think we would all agree with that. But I have a real question about your textbook's extension of this idea. If you read the textbook, right, the textbook says that Machiavelli believed that violence was a means to enhance power, and notice that he talks about Saddam Hussein in the box. I'm not sure it's a very good example, because how did things end for him? Right, Saddam Hussein ended up, after the American attack, kind of hiding and getting caught, being exposed, and of course, Saddam Hussein was executed. So I'm not sure that that's a great example of a leader acting as lion and fox. Certainly he was very ruthless, but many would say that Saddam Hussein was given a lot of intelligence that the United States was in fact going to attack, and the evidence suggests that Saddam Hussein believed that it was a great bluff and that it wouldn't happen. So in that case, Saddam Hussein may have been a lion, but he certainly was not a fox. He certainly was not cunning and bright. The book goes on to talk about the economy of violence theory, that force should only be used when necessary, and certainly I think even people who do not embrace Machiavelli would say that that's true. And obviously the reason, as I have pointed out in the notes, is that force, if implemented incorrectly, can diminish power. And certainly Hannibal maintained a large army through cruelty, but Hannibal also maintained that feature that Machiavelli says is most important. He had a reputation. He was very smart. He was very intelligent. He won battle after battle after battle. I want to conclude in the last minute with this debate about whether it's better to be feared or loved as a leader. Machiavelli argues in a perfect world you want both, of course. But if you only are forced to have one of them, it's better to be feared than loved. Now, here, once again, I bring up our good friend Cicero, the Roman, who argued it was far better to be loved than feared. So intriguing. We have a difference of opinion. Machiavelli's explanation is the prince can easily control those who fear him, but love can be fickle. And you can think about that. People are a person maybe that you loved at one time, and that love went south for some reason. Cicero would argue that love is a stronger emotion than fear, and that you're more willing to support, be loyal to, and fight for someone you love.